This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Hello and welcome to the show with me, Sam Webster, and a curious episode today where we're going to put into practice some key ideas lately of embracing the curious side of growth mindset and using some lessons that we learned from Richard Feynman around digging deeper on our assumptions to investigate a specific topic whilst uncovering our blind spots and then creating a truer understanding of actual reality. And it's the weekend. Always nice to do some curious investigation with psychology on whatever it is that we are investigating. So, on that, what are we investigating? Well, I have a story for you here. I have recently restarted my weekly newsletter exploring psychology ideas, and I put a day aside this week to send a post and then write and schedule 2 more emails to come out over the following weeks. Very sensible of me. However, disaster struck straight away with second email when the schedule button on Substack decided it wanted to be a send button, and just 2 hours after receiving a long email from me about psychology, all my subscribers received another long email from me. And this bonus surprise accidental mail rape of an email was on the topic of being more professional, lessons on having one's plans mapped out and getting your act together. So if I was going to mess up an email, it really couldn't have happened under more appropriate circumstances. A classic case of Murphy's Law that states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible time. And yes, almost instantly, 4% of my followers unsubscribed straight away. And this does feel intuitively obvious if you regard social norms and people not wanting a full inbox. But if you were an alien, let's say, looking at a human that has subscribed to a psychology newsletter, you might find this behavior weird. This human wants psychology information in their inbox. They have multiple newsletters they are subscribed to. They happily receive 2 long emails within a few minutes of each other on a similar topic if they are from different people. But from the same person, it's bad. That is odd and kind of curious when you think about it. And furthermore, the entire history of this newsletter is available for free in the form of a blog on the internet. And yet, all of these email subscribers don't read any of the backlog. What is wrong with these lazy humans that seem to be quite reactive to stuff? And it might sound like I'm being pedantic here, but actually it's something I have wondered about often. Some of my favorite authors have incredible blogs like Paul Graham, Tim Urban, Morgan Housel, but the effort to read all of their archive is just kind of overwhelming, and I've never got round to really digging through it all. Now, I know that we intuitively grasp that sending 2 emails in a day is bad, and that reading the archive of even a good blog is somehow difficult. But just because we think we know something, do we really know something? And this felt like a great excuse to unearth some topics like cognitive load theory, expectation violation, reactance theory, and how to build sustainable habits. So I'm inviting you today to dive into one of my long-held curiosities and investigate answers that will have some practical lessons for life. So firstly, cognitive load theory. This has 3 main elements. The first is intrinsic load, then there is extrinsic load, and finally Germane load. So intrinsic load. This is about the direct difficulty. Things like complicated maths, that's difficult. Perhaps telling your partner they are too fat whilst also having them understand that you love them at the same time, it's difficult. Intrinsic load. Then extrinsic load. This is about non-essential noise getting in the way of your experience. Imagine trying to listen to a good song and work out what the bass line is, but there are builders outside making a racket, your alarm is going off, there are babies crying, a lot of extraneous load going on that makes it hard to do the thing you want to do. Not easy. And this is the same extraneous load that we also experience if someone's teaching a subject, but they keep running off on tangents. Like they're teaching you to bake a cake, but they keep on talking about the history of cake making and where cherries came from. And you're like, I just want to make a cake, mate. Why are you giving me all this crap? And all those tangents just create extra waiting for the information you need. And it's frustrating and hard to do the thing you want to do. So a note to myself here, perhaps tangents can be bad. Now onto the third part of cognitive load theory, which is germane load. And no, it's not an acute overload of too many Germans in your immediate environment. Although I have heard from several sources that too many Germans in your immediate environment can be a real and experiential problem for people. But it is completely unrelated to actual germane load. And before you think I'm sounding racist here, the majority of the sufferers that I know who have experienced this phenomenon are in fact Germans themselves. Anyway, I did just mention that tangents may be a bad thing, so we'll move on. Actual germane load. The definition states the cognitive effort required to process, construct, and automate schemas. And this is the mental work directly contributing to learning and understanding. That's a great 2 lines. I'm not convinced I understood truly what they meant there. Possibly I'm suffering from too much germane load, but I didn't even really understand what it meant to truly say what that is. So following Richard Feynman's advice, let's try explaining it like I'm 5. Imagine your brain is like a toy box. When you learn something new, it's like adding a new toy into your toy box. The germane load is the work that your brain does to figure out where to put the new toy in the toy box so you can find it easily later. It's the effort of organizing and understanding the new toy or new information and what to do with it. And that makes a bit more sense. So imagine you know how to speak French and you know how to conjugate a verb. Someone gives you a new verb, you already understand how to do the I, he, she, we, them stuff. Whereas if you've never spoken a language like that before and someone just tries to teach you a verb with all these extra things, you're like, what are all these extra things? And so basically learning is easier when the information can fit with schemas or things that we already know. And if we don't already know much about the area, we have to invent an entirely new schema and you'll probably get confused in the process. This kind of explains things like the phenomenon of Chinese individuals taking Western names. It's easier for a Westerner to remember a traditional Western name compared to traditional Chinese names. So when Yuxian and Huairen moved to America, they call themselves David and Eric to prevent the terrible pronunciations like I just did that, and to also prevent germane load. And no, it's not because they hate the Germans. Right. Now, let's lean into applying cognitive learning theory, into applying some of this theory to why we are weirdly okay around newsletters and not adept at digging into blog archives. Firstly, intrinsic load. Well, a regular newsletter, it's a single thing, a manageable piece of content, a limited amount of new information in one go. The intrinsic load is low. That means it's easy for readers to process and enjoy the content. Cool, makes sense. Whilst a big blog archive, that takes effort to sift through multiple different posts, each with their own context and structure, higher intrinsic load. That means it's overwhelming, cognitively demanding to do. Now let's look at extraneous load. Regular newsletter, just one email. Reader doesn't have to search for or filter information. They just do the thing, that's it. No extraneous stuff. Whereas a large blog archive, readers have to navigate lots of different posts. And do you start from the start? Do you pick the best ones? Which one is the best one? Decisions, that's always extraneous load. Decisions are bad, extraneous load. Now onto Germane load. And considering all the effort we just went through to work out what Germane load is, I don't actually think it's that relevant for newsletters, which, to be honest, is a relief at this point. So yes, I've enjoyed learning the real definition of cognitive load theory, and we've had a few answers from my newsletter curiosity, but fewer than I hoped and a lot more tangents about Germans. So let's move on to expectation violation, perceived control, and reactance theory. As I've said, you could be happily subscribed to 2 different psychology newsletters, receive 2 emails within a few minutes, and it's great. But 2 emails from the same person is kind of gross, even though if something offers value, you'd expect more is better. But clearly there is a ratio to get right in anything we do, or the fact there is a limit might not even be obvious because we generally think more is good, but it suddenly does become obvious when we go too far. And these are things we often have to learn through life. As a kid, you're like, chocolate's great, I can always eat more chocolate. But at some point, you eat too much chocolate, maybe on Easter, and you're sick, and you're like, okay, there is a limit to how much chocolate I can actually eat. And then later in life, you maybe get into strawberries and you go to a strawberry farm and the strawberries are so good. And you eat like 2 kilos of strawberries in a day, and you can't eat another strawberry for months because it's too much. Anyway, I've made the point, I think. So let's look at expectation violation. Your inbox itself, it's a personal task list for you that you allow other people access to, and probably shouldn't allow as many people access to as you do. And if someone breaks the rules of the style of access that you thought you gave them, that's violating your expectations. And surprises aren't cool unless you're being given money for no reason or something wonderful like that. Generally, it's better to just not surprise people, even when you're giving them something, unless it's like just a bit extra and too much actually freaks them out. Then there's perceived control. People like to feel like they are in control of their environment. The higher control that you perceive in your personal environment and over your tasks, the less stress you have. If you have unexpected things come your way, it throws you off and it feels intrusive. So whatever you're doing in life, try to make sure that you're helping people feel in control at the same time, because they love to feel in control. If they know what they're getting, when they're getting it, and they can be in charge of their decisions, like, that's great. If it comes across random, not great. That's probably why all advice around newsletters or podcasts is to be regular and consistent at whatever cadence. It doesn't matter if it's once a month or once a day, but if you're going to do it, be consistent with that cadence, because then people can really estimate what sort of control they're going to have and what they're opting into, and you're not going to violate their expectations by doing something different. Another cool thing is reactance theory. When people perceive their freedom to choose something is being restricted, they may experience psychological reactance that stirs a motivational arousal to reclaim that freedom. Like William Wallace in Braveheart, didn't like the English, went around killing lots of people for the sake of freedom.
Would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
I'm not crying. You're crying. Okay, anyway, where were we? Yes, freedom. Well, similarly, an unexpected email obviously takes away your freedom to have a slightly organized inbox, and you feel overwhelmed and you're like, no, I want my freedom back. And that's just a little bit too much motivational arousal in one go. Unsubscribe. And this is actually really interesting and not something I'd thought about from this angle before, that one of the biggest sources of anger and reactivity for any human is the perception of our personal freedom. Like, of course, women are angry about the change in laws in America around terminating a pregnancy because it's taking away their personal freedom to choose things. Of course, I am angry about Brexit because it's taken away my personal freedom to just live in the EU when I feel like it. And if you hear a stranger playing loud and bad music that you didn't ask for, or someone increases the price on you, or you're made to stay an hour later at the office for no reason, that's taking away your freedoms and it's annoying. And we love freedom. So the lesson for us here is that if you feel like someone is getting angry about something, it's quite possibly related to their perception of their freedoms. And this is just a really cool insight that I'm very glad that I dug into this whole topic curiously for, because whether it's anger for yourself or anger with other people, the lens of freedom is just a nice way to look at it and think about how you might solve that for someone else or yourself. And I think it's a really interesting finding and slightly more practical than Germane load theory, which I have forever ruined with my Germanic overwhelm confusion. Anyway, let's talk about overwhelm and habits. In most cases, being a good boss means hiring the right people and getting out of their way. The important part is the crucial element of finding the right people. And that's what LinkedIn is for. It has the tools to help you find the right people faster and for free. It's not just a job board, but a professional network with over 1 billion members now. And many of these people aren't using job board sites, and they might not even be searching for a job, but would be open for the perfect role if someone was to actually tell them about it. So if you aren't looking on LinkedIn, you're probably looking in the wrong place. And some further amazing statistics is that 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, and 86% of them get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Try posting your job for free at linkedin.com/growth. That's linkedin.com/growth to post your job for free. Like all the best things in life, terms and conditions do apply. I am delighted to recommend my sponsor, Cozy Earth, whose bedding and loungewear I genuinely love. It's made from high quality viscose from bamboo, and it gets softer with every wash. It was voted as Oprah's favorite things several years in a row, and it's because their bed sheets are so damn incredible. Their collection also includes some divine loungewear for your home or travel. They have cute little tote bags to carry your gear anywhere. So whether you are exploring through a journey of personal growth or discovering new parts of the world, you can nestle up under starry skies with the softness of Cozy Earth's loungewear. So pack your bags, venture on, and visit cozyearth.com today and use code GROWTH at checkout for an exclusive 35% off. And let Cozy Earth be your travel companion on the road to adventurous growth. cozyearth.com and use code GROWTH at checkout. Now that we're back on track, let's round up some psychology answers for why our attention is just so stuck in the present. Like, sure, we listen to the news in the present, but then why do we listen to podcasts in the present or read newsletters like in the present when the whole archive of the newsletter or the podcast is perhaps just as good as the thing coming out today if it isn't something to do with the news? Like, for my podcast, 90% of what gets listened to is what I released in the last 2 weeks. Even though what I've been releasing for the last 2 years is kind of all similar. I don't really get political. I don't talk about the news. So it wouldn't really matter if you listen to something from a year ago or the one today. Whilst I'm mentioning it, I think it's worth pointing out that I'm not being pedantic, and I'm certainly not frustrated by this phenomenon. I don't want to prove a point. I think it's just really good to be curious when you have things like this. Sure, I could get frustrated by it, but that wouldn't help me at all. And I think a lot of growth mindset, stoicism, or Buddhism, all those lessons always say don't embrace anger when you could embrace curiosity. And I could look at it and be like, why don't people care about my content? What's wrong with people? I put all this work in and that wouldn't help me. But instead, if I'm curious about it and just go, well, that's reality. This is how human behavior works. Maybe there are some useful things in it. And when you look at the life cycle of a podcast listener, if you get to the ultimate goal of someone loves your content and they listen to almost all your episodes, they're really going to only be with you for like 3 months when they get a bit obsessed. And then after that, they'll just dip in and out to the odd episode. And that's how people listen to things. They become obsessed with a new podcast where they'll really religiously follow that one. And that's the best case. And if I got annoyed by that, that wouldn't get me anywhere. Instead, if I go, okay, this is reality, what's good about that? Well, I've made lots of good content over the years, a lot of which I can use because most people listening in the present haven't heard it. I did a whole season on stoicism at the end of last year, And I'm thinking about doing a psychology versus concept for some seasons going forward. And there are some things from Stoicism I would happily revisit. And I've got half the work done for me, but I can put my new lessons into it and do, for me, Stoicism 2.0. For my listeners, it's basically the first time they've heard it. If I do have the odd, really obsessed listener, they're not going to mind hearing my improved version of what I've done before again, because they like me so much. So it's actually a win for me if I can be curious as opposed to being annoyed. So anyway, a lesson on accepting reality with curiosity as opposed to anger. So 2 lessons on anger today. And back to the present topic of why we are stuck in the present so much. But this is just how we do things. We engage with things as they come at us, rather than controlling how we come at it, which is kind of interesting. Then there's also the paradox of choice. The more choices that you have, the harder it is to make a decision. And we like not putting effort into decisions. If you have to look at all the posts in someone's Substack, it's kind of bewildering. So Substack does have a feature that says the top rated posts of an author to try and help reduce decision overwhelm, but that might only help you read a few more, whereas just clicking subscribe, just suddenly having a new email once a week, no decisions need to be made, you just slowly get through it. It's the same with subscribing to a podcast versus listening to the archive, or watching what's on your YouTube recommendations page versus going through the entire archive. Just less taking an active role in our decisions and letting them being done for us, which is kind of curious to think about. Then we also have habits. We don't actually have a regular 3-hour block in our schedule to read through the archive of a blog, but we do check our email every day. If an article appears in our email, we can get through it. It's part of our other habit of checking email. It's just an extra few minutes on top of it. And humans don't like trying to create extra time in places. They like it being stuffed into things where they're already putting that time into it. And they also don't like doing big things. If you can break down a big thing into a small thing and attach it to something else that you're already doing, it's really easy to do. Like, it's absurd to imagine you're going to put 4 hours into reading the archive of Paul Graham, even today on the weekend, whereas if you get one email from him, it's going to happen. And if you keep on getting one email once a week, that's easy to deal with. And you'd think there'd be a better answer for this other than a regular newsletter subscription. I'm kind of surprised that there isn't an app that would take a weekly blog that has existed for many years and email it to you twice as regularly, or whatever setting you're comfortable with, than the rate that it's being released. And so after another 4 years, you'd have kept up with everything in the present and read the entire history of it. And I think that would be really cool. And I would totally use that app for a few of the greatest blogs out there that I would like to get through. In fact, Tim Urban, which I mentioned, has actually implemented this. If you subscribe to his blog, you'll get some of his old posts once a month, and I really like that feature. Another idea here is converting blogs into ebooks. And you could take an entire blog from one website, scrape each article and stitch them together into a PDF or an EPUB, whatever, and just stick it on your Kindle, and then you can read it like a book. There's so much free content out there, but you can fit it into the habit of reading books on your Kindle and actually get through the history of it. And that's also something that I really like. One of my other favorite authors, Derek Sivers, some of his books are simply his best blogs in an area stuck together in a book. And in fact, 5 years ago, I built a web scraper that created an ebook out of my friend's travel blog just because I wanted to read it, and he'd written it like 3 years beforehand. So if you're interested in that as a tool, let me know, because I might fix it as just one of my side projects. Because now I've spoken about it, it feels relevant and like perhaps I should do it. Anyway, I think that is enough exploring some of this curious stuff. We've had some answers, we've had some app ideas, we've learned about Germane load theory, and yes, I have learned that I should definitely be sorry for my gross expectation violation that I made for my readers. But if you are interested in becoming a reader of my blog, then you can find it on Substack called Expansive Thinking, and the link is in the description. Hopefully you did learn something today about cognitive load, reactance theory, and why habits define what you do with your life. And hopefully learn something about being curious and uncovering what your assumptions are and see if there's something more in them that's worth learning about. Because I certainly had some ideas and lessons about anger, of all things, whilst digging into this by embracing my curious side. If you are looking for any book ideas, I think a good relevant book that perhaps goes into some of these areas and really weaves together the concepts of cognitive biases, funky human psychology, and some habit building is from Dan Ariely and his book, Predictably Irrational. That's a super good book. Also, Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, who is a really interesting psychology researcher as well. And whilst I'm talking about books, shout out to Shortform, who do summaries of the world's greatest books and lots of incredible psychology books on there. They are giving listeners a 2-week free trial and 20% off an annual subscription if you go to shortform.com/psychology. And yes, book summaries are not a complete substitute for reading a whole book, but they are a great way to experiment and dive into different things without committing to a whole book or relearning stuff from books you have already read. And on the subject of books, I have been talking with my listeners every Wednesday afternoon, which has been great. Feel free to book a call with me if you're interested. One thing I found is that lots of you happen to be as obsessed with books as I am. Because of that, there will probably be more book-related content on the show. I am looking to launch a book club where we dive into one really good non-fiction book once a month. And I think it's going to be really cool. So let me know if you're interested in that. I should also definitely mention that a lot of my favorite people on the planet are actually Germans. And if you aren't suffering from Germane load, the History of the Germans podcast is actually kind of witty. And it's the complete history of the German nation from its beginning in 919. It pretty much covers the history of Europe at the same time, but from a new angle. And if you are a history geek, it is something fun and kind of heavy going, but also full of curious new insights. If you're into a history, get stuck in. If you're not, definitely don't go near it. You would hate it. It's pretty hardcore on the history level. And I think that's enough of my recommendations besides saying definitely book a call with me if you're interested. And otherwise, if you know anybody who has some major reactance theory problems, suffers from too much Germane load, or frequently violates your expectations, then do send them this episode, as it is how the show grows. So take it easy, people. Remember, life is too short for sending 2 emails in one day. So don't make that mistake. I'm sure that was a useful lesson for you there. And don't forget to be kind to yourself, climb or hug a tree this summer, and smile at strangers.